and thinking exemplary. And say this. Train your evaluators to do this. And also tell them, don't plan to ease into it. So you've been giving all exemplaries in the past, or all whatever the top rating is, and so the evaluator may think, well, you know, I can see this, but I'm going to ease into it this year in the pilot, and next year I'll bear down a little more. Don't do it. Go whole hog. Do the whole thing right now, or you'll never do it. Make sure you start with proficient. This will be one of the most contentious points with teachers. I can pretty well assure you of that. Your teachers are not going to be happy being considered proficient. But please understand, it is not average. It's not okay. It is high quality performance. If you read the rubric under proficient for all 11 standards, you have to be very good in this profession to be proficient. Another way to think of proficient is that it is contributing to the quality of life of kids. Kids are getting better if I'm working in a proficient fashion. This is what we want. And when the evidence justifies it, we move up. And when the evidence justifies it, we move down. We should not be afraid to judge performance on emerging or even unacceptable when that's what it is. If we have a 5-point scale, all 5 points are intended to be in play. On the upper end, it should never ever be the case where a few teachers will say, I don't give A's in my class. Well, you shouldn't be grading. If that's on your grading scale and people deserve A's, they should get A's or A pluses. Every point should be in play. And we have, on the other end, a lot of administrators who are extraordinarily reluctant to rate anybody as unacceptable. Well, if you don't want to make that call, you shouldn't be in the job. I mean, I think it was Mr. Truman said, if you can't stand the heat, get out of the kitchen. Because when people are unacceptable, they're harming kids. Either by error or omission, kids are not being helped in those classes. And if we let that keep going on, we will continue to harm kids. There is an enormous opportunity cost for allowing teachers to perform in error at a level where they should not be performing. Make the call where it is. Now, one more thought about this distribution. We're not expecting and looking for a normal bell-shaped curve. Somebody made some really bad hiring choices if that's what we end up with. We want unacceptables when they're deserved. We want emergings when they're deserved. But if we were to look at sort of a continuum of this, we want a big chunk of proficients. And we also want to see the accomplished and the exemplaries. We're not looking for bell-shaped curve, but we're looking for every point to be in play. Okay? Any questions? Here are your 5 levels. We've color-coded these with some symbolism behind them. Green means go. Green's good. Emerging is cautionary. Unacceptable is a red light. It's a stoplight, and it says you better stop and head off again. We better make sure we stop that. The blues are, think of it as the blue ribbons, if you will. There's the light and the darker blue. And these are only generalized terms. Some evaluation systems have no more than these generalized terms, and some don't even have that. They just have a rating and say, go rate people. That's pure imagination. But look at the terms we're using. Generally, we're aiming for proficient to be meeting the standard. Accomplished is consistently performing above. You can have a person who occasionally rises up into the accomplished or the exemplary level on a given day. But usually, they're down in proficient. They would be proficient. But consistently being above in that area would make one accomplished. And then consistently and considerably, which are both descriptors, but the concept that we'd like for you to embrace, consistently, regularly, and considerably, which means the quantity, how high, how much higher, surpassing the standard would make one as exemplary. Emerging is really also consistently, but it's consistently being below, often, or partially. And then the consistently, on an ongoing basis, is below. Okay, proficient is what we've said, and I think I've tried to make that point already. It is the starting point. I was setting you up for failure a few minutes ago on the Make the Room standard. If I'd taken a little more time, I was planning to go around the room and ask you to give me your rating. And I set up a model in the beginning. Twice I did this by saying, here's proficient, and I moved up the scale, then I moved down the scale. St. Martin, you ruined my game. Because what I expected you to do is to go left to right. You went right to left, St. James. And that's fine, but what I wanted to emphasize is don't go left to right. I know we learned that when we learned to read, but the progression is not left to right. The progression is middle, and you move off of it when you need to. That's what we want to do. And that symbolism carries some real power. Train your evaluators to think this way and act this way. It's a very important attribute to the rubric. Now, let's look at some sample standards. Let's take just a few of these, and we'll take the descriptors underneath them. You have a 3-layer system, and your handbook spells this out in pretty clearly, I think. There are some sort of cartoon captions that are placed in to explain domains, the standards, the descriptors under the competencies, the standards, the descriptors underneath them. Let's look under the planning standard at performance descriptor 2. And in this one, the standard is the teacher aligns the unit and lesson plans with the established curriculum to meet annual achievement goals. That's the standard. That's the unit of analysis. That's the level where a teacher will receive a rating. Teachers are going to receive 11 ratings. It's diagnostic. Is that correct, Celeste?
Yes.
Okay. But look at this. Under this, here's one descriptor on that planning standard, and it's only one of the descriptors. This is called a behaviorally anchored summary scale, where you have this one descriptor that runs across in this sort of continuum, but underneath it we have another descriptor, and underneath it we may have a third descriptor. We package them all together, and now we see, aha, this is what we mean by Standard 1. We're giving meaning to Standard 1. Let me take just one of these. I'm not going to unpack each. I only want to illustrate. But if we take, here's descriptor 3 in instruction. We're just moving around sort of randomly. Here's the proficient level on this single descriptor. Creates relevance by connecting content to the interest in real life and previous experiences of kids. To go beyond that, it's exposing children to career opportunities. And to go beyond that, it's creating authentic problem-based learning. I can see that. I could judge that as an evaluator. Emerging is inconsistently creating relevance. And unacceptable, there is no relevance. Kids don't see why they're learning this. It's like putting those words on the board and erasing it every time. That had relevance, I just didn't get it. But that alone, you will not make a judgment on this. You will not give a rating on this. Underneath it will be packaged some additional descriptors that when we aggregate them, we get to the standard and we're able to say, aha, overall, the teacher is presenting accurate, developmentally appropriate content related to real-world examples, prior knowledge, and other disciplines. That's the standard, and that's where we want to make the rating. So we diagnose, we divide it up into its pieces, and then we repackage it, we re-aggregate it to make our judgment. If we don't do it that way, we end up with a very artificial rubric that gives us 80 or 100 different ratings, and we do not want that. We're not going back to that glorified 100-item checklist. This is not a checklist. And here are more examples doing the very same thing. Rating performance, then, in summary, will occur at the performance standard level, not the descriptor level. Descriptors are merely indicators, examples, samples, as the word implies, describing, descriptors of what is the standard. And look at the third bullet. This is a very important point. We will judge based on preponderance of evidence. And when we get into exercises, you'll start seeing that. And we're coming back in January for training, and we're going to focus on preponderance of evidence.